Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I'm Santita Jackson. It's a joy to be with you today. We've got a lot to talk about. Let's look at all of the money that we're spending overseas, all of the money that we're spending on wars. What could it pay for in the United States? Depending upon which study you read, 47 to 53% of our budget goes to the military. A very small percentage goes to education and healthcare. And what would it be like if we spent that money elsewhere? We could have Medicare for all. We could send everybody to college for four years, debt free. We could. There's so much that we could do with that money. What about the billions that we just cast off to Ukraine and to other countries? What about that? Let's talk about it on the Santita Jackson Show. I want you to go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, like and subscribe there. The Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, like and subscribe there, please. And then the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. That's the only page I've got, everybody. The other page, I can't accept any other friends, but I can accept as many friends as I want on Santita Jackson and Friends. Thus the name. There you go. And please give all of your support to AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, and stream them at am950radio.com. They've got some of the best progressive talk in the country. Come on. With Ilhan Omar and Amy Klobuchar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Please, you even have this maverick, Dean Phillips, running for president. Can you really go wrong in Minneapolis? Sending my love to Spike and to Reverend McAfee and Gary Hines and all my friends there. So I want you to reach out to me, and I want you to let me know what you think about this military budget. What do you think about the military budget? What should we do? We have so much power. That's why we have to vote. That's why we have to vote. It is so important that our voices be heard at this time, because we need to understand that we're the ones who control the levers of power. The power of the purse is supposed to reside with Congress. With Congress. So, and yet, only 11% of congresspersons are voting for a ceasefire when more than two-thirds of America want a ceasefire. That's because dark money, big money, controls American politics. Let's not be naive, everybody. That's how it works. But I tell you what, the people have more power than anybody else. You're the ones with the power. You're the ones with the power. People matter more than anyone. So, do you want Medicare for all? Do you want every person in the United States to have a home, to have food, clothing, and shelter? If we didn't spend this much money on the military, if we didn't spend this much money on these overseas war adventures, we'd have enough money to take care of Americans. We'd have enough money to fix our infrastructure, to make sure that every child had a computer in schools, that internet connectivity was a reality for everybody. We could do these things, but we have to have the will to vote and to demand that our representatives represent our best interests. So please stream us at AM 950 Radio, AM 950 Radio. And let's talk about this bill that's been chopped up into many little pieces about aid to Israel. They're going to find a way to put it in there, even though Americans want strings attached. You tell me what it is that you think ought to happen. How will your representative vote? You need to call them and let them know how you want them to vote. Call your congressman, your congresswoman. Let them know how it is that you want them to vote on this important piece of legislation. And it really is symbolic as much as it is actual. Because what we need to know is where you stand, not just where you stand, but where you're being forced to stand. We need to know, we need to let you know how we want you to vote. Remember, voting is the end of the beginning, not the beginning of the end. The start of the process, the start of your involvement in American politics ends when you vote. That's just the beginning. After that, you have to stay on top of your representatives and you have to let them know how you want them to vote. You have to let them know what it is that you want them to do. So get registered to vote. Get registered to vote. Get registered to vote. Get these high school seniors registered to vote. Get them registered to vote. Chaparral, let's check on Reverend Vicki Johnson and see where she is so we can get this good news, the word of the day. And we're going to get things going on the show today. But I want to know what you think about no ties on money to Israel, the monies that we continue to spend in Ukraine, all of these monies that are just going overseas when we so desperately need them. We so desperately need these monies right here, right here in the United States, right here in the United States. So you let me know what your thoughts are. Reach out to me on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, and Santita Jackson and Friends on Facebook. Let me know what your thinking is. Let me know where you are. Well, we've got Pastor Vicki Johnson. Let me add you to the stage so we can get some good news from you. Pastor Vicki Johnson,
I am here.
how are you?
I am well. How are you, my dear?
I am doing great. How can we worship with you here in Chicago and around the country? Because by Facebook and YouTube, we're reachable everywhere.
Yes. Well, you can worship with me on Sundays at 9 o'clock a.m. at Lebanon Lutheran, 13100 South Manistee. And you can worship with me at 11:30 a.m. at St. Thomas Lutheran, 80th and Jeffrey Boulevard. Both services are on Facebook and in person. We'd love to have you.
Fantastic. Well, talk to us. We need some good news today. There's so much going on every single day.
Amen. Amen. Well, good morning, Santita, and good morning to all of your morning stars and friends. There is good news. Tomorrow is Ash Wednesday, a Christian holy day of prayer and fasting. It is the first day of Lent, a period of preparation for the passion of Christ. We are marked with ashes to remind us of our frailty. From the dust we come, and to the dust we shall return. People will be making sacrifices during this 40-day period, giving up things that they like, like meat or candy,
Yeah.
sweets, bread, soda, fried fried foods, social media, and the like. Things that might not always be good for you in excess. But what about taking on the cause for justice during these 40 days of Lent? Instead of taking off something, what about committing yourself to the things that will make life equitable for all?
Mm.
We give up food, but what about those who are hungry? In Isaiah, the 58th chapter and the 10th verse, it says, "Feed the hungry and help those in trouble. Then your light will shine in the darkness, and the darkness around you will become bright as snow." Lord, use me as a vessel to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to get justice in
Mm.
this world. See what you can do during this 40-day period of Lent, this time of preparation for the resurrection. What can you do that will rid us of the ills of this society in your own special way? There's something that all of us can do. We want, we really want liberty and justice for all.
Hmm.
Instead of giving up, take on, and let's fight for justice. If you will do this, and I believe that you will, then to me, that's good news.
I love that. That's a different take on Lent.
Mhm.
I mean, as we think about all the things that we need to give up instead of the things that we need to take on, just very quickly, why did you take that turn?
Well, because a lot of the things that we give up, they're frivolous, and some of them really don't mean anything. And I know that I have been a person that giving up fried foods or giving up sweets for Lent on the time Lent is over, like at whatever, whatever time I awaken, then I return immediately to those things. So that discipline of 40 days really did not benefit me in the long run.
Hmm.
But if we can add on some things that are not so much for ourselves as individuals, but something that will help us to study war no more, something that will help to bring peace right here in our own country, as well as in the countries that are warring right now. What if we could do something that would make a difference there? Then it will go down in history that these people were the ones that had a hand in bringing peace on earth.
Hmm. I like that. I like that. Because we need that more than ever.
Yes.
Because once Lent is over, you are running back to those potato chips. You're like, look,
Mm,
I did it. I stayed away from it. But
that's
is it
right. The
really
big
sacrifice?
bag. We get the big bag, not a small bag, but the big one.
You know, I hear you. I hear you. I hear you. Well, you know what? I want to thank you for that. Again, how can we worship with you? For those people who are not in
Mhm.
Chicago, how can they worship with you on
You can
Sunday?
worship with us on Facebook at Lebanon Lutheran Church, 9 o'clock on Sunday mornings. And we are located at 13100 South Manistee in Chicago, and at St. Thomas Lutheran on 80th and Jeffrey Boulevard at 11:30 a.m. We'd be so happy to have you.
I love it. I'm going to shock you and stop by one of these Sundays after I finish work. Because you got work on
Yes,
Sundays.
I know. I know. I hear you.
Oh my gosh. But I'm not different from too many people. A lot of people work throughout, through the weekend and all of that. But I want to thank you for that.
You are
Thank you.
welcome.
Sending you so much love.
Much
Pastor
love to
Vicki
you.
Young. Not one congregation, but two. Whew. God bless you.
Amen.
You
Amen.
got the energy. I love it. I love it. Well, you know what? We've got some important legislation that's coming up that we're going to be talking with Jonah Karsh about in just a few minutes. But we've got Pastor Todd Yeary on with us, and I'm so glad that he's with us today. We're going to be talking about our budgetary priorities. So much that we could be paying for if we did not spend all of this money on these international, now many people call them misadventures. I mean, the argument has been made that we have not won a war since World War II. We're still in Korea. That's why you've got the DMZ. We have not won that conflict. We did not win in Vietnam. We did not win in Afghanistan. It's a losing proposition except for the contractors. And it's important for us to understand that one fourth of this year's military budget, which is truly $1 trillion budget, one fourth of that money went to military contractors. One fourth. Before we bring on Jonah Karsh, Pastor Todd Geary, what do you make of that? I mean, it's the people, it's the military industrial contractors who are making this money. Reverend Dr.
Well,
Geary.
well, good morning to you, Santita. Um, there are a couple of things there. If you follow the money and follow the companies and follow the relationships, you recognize very quickly that it's an inside game. It's an inside game about who actually gets selected for the contracts. Many of these contracts are not vetted completely. Many of them are sole source, depending on how the contract bid is written. But the other piece is and I often hear your father's words telling us that budgets are moral documents.
Mm.
They tell us what value we place on our priorities. And when we spend so much time funding war and conflict, it means that we're not spending enough of our resource investing in hope and future and promise.
Mm.
And so we have a conflict of values that is actually playing itself out at the expense of all of us who contribute to the public coffers. We pay taxes. These dollars are spent in our name and on our behalf, but they don't always reflect what our needs are. They don't reflect what our priorities are. And you mentioned having not won a war since World War II. The inside baseball is there's been no formal declaration of war. These are what we call police actions. We've become the police department of the world, trying to enforce laws and expect outcomes that are in keeping with the capitalistic interest of the nation. And so war, in many instances, has become profitable. Destabilizing economies has become profitable. And when we look at the profiteering, it shouldn't surprise us that it shows up in how these contracts are let, how these contracts are vetted, and at the end of the day, who's making money at the expense of the lives of many.
Well, I mean, and we're suffering. I mean, you would think that we've got an infrastructure that is second to none. It's a 100-year-old infrastructure, actually. You would think that all of our children are able to go to school and they have the necessary supplies, they have the computers, they have access to the internet. That is not true. In fact, there are many places around the country where we have zero proficiency in math and reading for many of our children in the United States. What does that say to you, Pastor Yuri, about
Well,
our priorities?
it says, one, that we've not wrestled with the reasons why. You cannot expect a child to learn without adequate resource. You cannot expect a child to learn when they are vulnerable in terms of where they lay their heads at night, vulnerable in terms of how they're going to be able to find food. We have food deserts that still run rampant. We still have inadequacies in terms of how we fund SNAP and other nutritional programs. And for many poor students across the board, regardless of color, as I often say, poverty is a condition, it's not a color. Many poor students find themselves relying on literally most of their food coming through food nutrition programs at school. And so they're not coming to school to learn, they're coming to school to survive. And because we've not prioritized a guaranteed minimum income, access to a job, making sure that we have housing affordability and housing stability, we have this inverted budget that prioritizes profiteering or profit making for the few at the expense of the many. And so when we look at the wealth gap that has widened since COVID and during COVID, when we look at how companies are making more money, not less, it says then that we are now being very intentional about the conditions we face because we haven't been more proactive in righting the ship, if you will. And so while some folks are living large on yachts, others of us are going down on the Titanic of bad public policy, and it is drowning most of the nation.
It really, I mean, it's killing our children and it's killing people. I mean, this is a horrible, horrible thing. And yet this is where we are. And so these are moral documents. And I think we got to talk about, where we are morally. But I bring up Jonah Karsh to talk to us about a piece of legislation that he really feels that we need to be looking at, because as we look at all of this money that we're spending, and more Americans are questioning our expenditures because more and more Americans need so much. And we have less and less and less. They keep saying that, well, Americans are doing better. Well, it's something called the mean in mathematics when you average out the top and the bottom. The fact is, people at the bottom have less, people at the top have more, and when you come up with the mean, you have an expanded mean, you have a bigger number. People are not doing well. Most of us aren't. So let's think about that. Jonah Karsh from If Not Now, a tremendous group of young Jewish American activists, but they are in coalition with Palestinian American activists, with Black activists, with activists, really Asian American activists, activists all over the spectrum, who really trying to make America fair and better. Their focus at this time, one of them, I would say, is what this slaughter that's happening in Gaza. But you're looking at the Poor People's Campaign, you're looking at our broad budgetary priorities, you're looking at a whole range of issues. But what is this legislation that you want us to look at right now, Jonah?
Yeah, well, just to frame that conversation too, as you're saying, we have so many problems in our country. Our democracy is under threat. People are living paycheck to paycheck, not able to make ends meet. We have a broken healthcare system. We have so many problems that need to be solved. And we have entrenched white supremacy in our country, and still an enormous racial wealth gap. We have homelessness. I just saw an estimate from the Department of Housing and Urban Development that the United States could end homelessness by spending $20 billion to do so. But the legislation that I want to bring up that is before the House of Representatives right now, it just passed the Senate this morning, is a bill to send $95 billion overseas. And in particular, there's some important provisions around humanitarian aid for Gaza, but $14 billion of that aid would be for the Israeli military. $14 billion for the Israeli military as they carry out we saw during the Super Bowl this horrible assault on Gaza, which rescued 2 hostages, thankfully, but which killed almost 100 people. How is that worth it? How do we value human life so little that we're willing to kill 100 people on any occasion for any reason? And how can we say to the government of Israel, we don't like what you're doing? Joe Biden says far too many civilians have died. The Secretary of State says far too many civilians have died. Joe Biden called the campaign over the top, and yet still say, when we have so many problems at home, and we can solve homelessness in our country for $20 billion, that we're going to spend $14 billion on this war in Israel, give more money to the Israeli military to carry out these operations that are genocidal in nature. It's against our values, and I'm really hoping, the Speaker of the House, for other reasons related to border security and anti-immigrant sentiments that he holds, said that he doesn't want to bring this up for a vote. But it seems like there's going to be an effort to force a vote, to get a majority of the House to sign what's called a discharge petition and force a vote on the floor. And we're really concerned about that, and If Not Now, because we have so many problems at home, and we can't afford to be sending more money to Israel for the crimes that they're committing in Gaza.
Do you object to money going to Israel or money without strings attached, or is it both?
If Not Now, which is the organization that I'm a part of, we're an organization of young American Jews that's fighting for justice and equality in Israel-Palestine against Israel's apartheid system. Our position is that so Israel gets $3.8 billion a year on a normal basis, and our opinion is there need to be really clear strings attached to that annual allotment, no matter what. We're talking about above and beyond that $3.8 billion right now. We're talking about $14 billion on top of that, in addition to whatever more billions we've already sent. So we oppose any money, any supplemental money for this war, and if it is sent, which we strongly oppose, any money that goes at all to any country needs to have strong strings attached around human rights conditions.
So, so what are you doing? Are you calling congresspersons and lobbying them? I mean, what what is the substance of your appeal?
we've been doing a lot of lobbying and calling the Congress people. We've been when this bill was still in the Senate, we urged our members to call Senator Durbin, who's called for a ceasefire. We believe that anyone who's called for a ceasefire and believes that this war should end can't be sending more money to continue the war. It's just not a consistent position, and it's not a moral position. So yes, we're absolutely encouraging people to call their Congress people and oppose sending any more money to Israel for the duration of this war, to continue this campaign in Gaza. And we're marshaling our members and thinking about how we can be taking direct action to that end as well, because this is a really important moment.
So I was talking with Congressman Jonathan Jackson, and he said that this aid package has been chopped up and put in several pieces of legislation. So, well, he's new to Congress. This is his first term. See, half the time you don't even know what you're voting on. I mean, you think you're voting on this, and they've tucked this in.
Mm-hmm.
You're voting on that, and they tuck this in. I mean, because it's a shell game that they're playing. It's just like no matter what, it just seems that these people are determined to get this money to Israel, to Ukraine, to wherever. But let's specifically Israel. What is Israel spending this money on?
Yeah, this money it's essentially a subsidy. So some of it goes towards Iron Dome systems, the systems that Israel uses to shoot down rockets, which of course are a life-saving system. But the vast majority of this money is going towards, it's basically a subsidy for the American weapons industry. The U.S. gives Israel money.
No, say that one more time.
Yeah.
I don't want people to miss that.
It's essentially it's a subsidy for the American weapons industry. So Israel, what the United States does with the vast majority of the military aid that they send to Israel is they say, here, Israel, here's billions of dollars. We want you are required to spend this money on American weapons. And so the bombs that are being dropped on children, tank shells, guns, ammunition, a huge portion of that is made in the United States and is paid for by our taxpayer money. It's almost like we're giving Israel a gift card. So that's what most of it is for.
So these packages really are supplementing the military-industrial complex.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think most people, Reverend Dr. Uri, most people don't know that. They don't know the extent. I mean, we just think that the money's been given to Israel and they're doing whatever it is that they please with it. But there is this agreement, Jonah, with the military-industrial complex writ large. I mean, that's transpartisan, that's transnational. I mean, to keep the wars going all around the world, it seems, Jonah. I mean, and it seems like this is it's an even bigger issue than Israel and the United States, even though it seems like America is the military arm for the world. I mean, that's what we do. We build bombs and guns and stuff.
It's horrible when we have so many problems at home to be solving, when there's so much injustice at home that needs to be solved, that we spend so much money on war around the world, wars that do, if anything, destabilize the regions that we're in and don't keep us safe at all. And absolutely, this is bigger than Israel. This is about the war machine, and Israel is just a manifestation of that. There are a lot of pillars that benefit from U.S. support for Israel. There are those in the Jewish community who ideologically really believe in it. There are those in the Christian evangelical community who ideologically and religiously really believe in it, and then there are also those who profit from it. And the weapons industry are high among them. And if you listen to the earnings calls of some of these weapons manufacturers, they were talking about how this war is great for their bottom line. Absolutely.
In fact, that's what they were saying at the beginning of this conflict, right after October 7th, after that tragedy. They said, as tragic as this is, we're about to make a lot of money.
Right.
Oh my gosh. So where do we go from here, Jonah?
Where we go from here is that President Biden has the power to end this with a phone call. We really believe that. We've believed it from day one. It's not, maybe it wouldn't be immediate, negotiations need to happen. But if President Biden, who has the executive authority to do this, calls up Prime Minister Netanyahu and says, we're freezing all money. We're not giving you any more money. And the nature of our relationship is going to fundamentally change if this doesn't stop immediately. If you don't stop the bombing immediately and enter a ceasefire agreement. If he got on the phone with Prime Minister Netanyahu and said that we could end this extremely quickly, and he hasn't, and he doesn't want to, and it seems, and the only way to get him to is to really ramp up the pressure, especially internally in his own party, which is a huge part of the reason that we're pushing so hard on Congress. We need President Biden to understand that his party is not with him on this, and that his party is not going to agree to send billions of dollars more in weapons to Israel.
Okay, well, everybody call your congressman, let them know how you want them to vote. And I think I want you to continue to come back, Jonah, so we can have an understanding of where this money is really going. Because, for you to help us to understand that this really is a subsidy for the military-industrial complex, particularly the American arm of it, which is really at the foundation of the military-industrial complex all around the world. It changes things. I mean, 1/4 of the budget goes to Pentagon contractors. I mean, that's how they're making their money. And yet all of these people are dying. I mean, even President Biden said that this was over the top. Just before you go, why do you think he's not moving forward on this?
You're asking.
I mean, why do you think that he won't pick up that phone to make that phone call?
Yeah, I think when I had the pleasure of guest hosting your show, I had Peter Beinart on, who's a great thinker on this, and I asked him a version of this question, and I was really, he gave a really interesting answer. He said that Joe Biden is famous for his empathy, but it seems that his life experience has not allowed him. There's some sort of disconnect where he's not able to see Palestinians as fully human. I'm afraid, and hasn't had the life experiences to be able to extend that empathy to them. And some of that has to do with, there's stories about early in his Senate career, he had relationships with some Jewish senators who were very strong supporters of Israel and learned about the Holocaust. And I think the lesson that he learned from the Holocaust is that the Jewish people need to be safe, and the only way they can be safe is through the state of Israel. And what we believe is that you don't get safety from making other people unsafe. It's a lie. It doesn't work. Maybe for a little bit, but as we saw on October 7th, people will resist oppression. Not that we justify the events of October 7th, but you have to put them in context and understand when you put people under occupation, when you put people under siege, how they're going to react. And I think that President Biden's life experiences, perhaps his lack of proximity to Palestinians, hasn't allowed him to see that in full, and it's really tragic.
Well, give us some marching orders before you go.
Yes, please call your congressional offices and tell them that we are asking them to oppose any efforts, whether it's a discharge petition or a vote. Just call your congressional offices and tell them that you do not support any more money going to the state of Israel for this war.
All right. Jonah Karsh, if not now, thank you so much for being with us today. And can't wait to have you back on. And we will see what happens. I guess it would be after today or tomorrow.
Yeah, the vote could be any day. The House goes out of town at the end of the week. And I think there's going to be a lot of push to try to make something happen before then. So we're in an important moment.
Okay, it is an important moment. And it's a moment in which we're now fighting over our budgets and everything else. And this is part of that fight. Jonah Karsh, if not now, thank you so much for being with us, Jonah.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Reverend Dr. Uri, so what do you think about what you've heard? I mean, that this really is the underwriting of the American arm of the military-industrial complex, really, and America really is at the center of the military-industrial complex internationally. What do you make of that?
So there are a couple of things. There's the industry support that comes from the flow of money, and then there are the political interests that are attached to the money in an election year where all of the members of the House, one third of the Senate, and the presidency are all hanging in the balance. And so a lot of this is using the public purse to purchase preference. Almost, it's a two-way benefit. Many times, it's interesting that we will see what the new speaker will do with this bill once it comes across from the other chamber. But what we have to recognize is that when you think about Ukraine, when you think about Israel, there's a piece in it for Taiwan, and then there is a bit of it for humanitarian assistance. That what we don't hear in this conversation is what we often hear when it comes to what we call public safety net programs, those things that help ease the burden and the pain of folks who are struggling to survive. If we were having a conversation about this bill dealing with food insecurity, dealing with housing insecurity, what you would hear would be a debate about how are we going to pay for it. It would have to come with some requisite cut. You don't hear that in the raising of these billions and billions of dollars to fund these conflicts. Anybody ever asking, where are we going to find the money to be able to support these priorities or these needs, as they will call them? And so I think it's important that we listen to the full context of the conversation and what's missing. We have to ask ourselves the question: there's something missing here. If we go back to a couple of budget cycles ago, they cut the per meal appropriation for poor people receiving SNAP because they said we couldn't afford it. They'll have this conversation about Social Security not being affordable. For whatever reason, war is always affordable, and there's always enough money to fund it completely and to fund it repeatedly. And so I think we've got to get our moral compass back. We've got to reclaim our sense of centeredness around the priority of human rights and human dignity, and not just go after these, I'll call them very loosely, opportunities to fund conflicts in other spaces and places, trying to win preference with other people that we really need them. The United States has become reliant upon the need of the rest of the world to depend on them to fund these conflicts. And for whatever reason, I often say, we often talk in the addiction world, crackheads have crack. The United States has dependence upon military conflicts to feed its addiction to being needed to police the world. And that's why you don't have a declaration of war, but what you do have is a funding of police actions that allows the United States to engage and insert itself in any conflict, anywhere, at any time. And they can spend unlimited money in the eyes of what we've seen from public policy to be able to support that.
We're welcoming to our platform from the National Conference of Black Lawyers, brilliant writer, thinker, and civil libertarian, attorney Mark Fancher. Welcome. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine. Thank you.
Got a new format and we're working it out. It's wonderful hearing your voice today. You know, we just had Jonah Carr from If Not Now on with us. Of course, these are these young Jewish activists who are fighting apartheid in Israel. And they're doing it in partnership with Palestinians and Palestinian Americans. And they're looking for justice and liberty in the United States, by the way, too, fighting oppression and white supremacy and so much. I mean, I have such admiration for these young people. And they're pushing back, should I say, on this bill that this unfettered money, no strings attached, that we're going to give to Israel once again. And more Americans are saying, not only do we not want to give you money, we don't want to give you money with no strings attached. We're beginning to ask the question, Mark, if I got $3.8 billion in the Mississippi Delta, in Appalachia, in urban America, in suburban America, in rural America, what could we do? I mean, just that little money, because it's like we cut checks for Ukraine, we cut checks for all of these other places, but everybody else has to fight, Mark. something's off here.
It's off for real people. It's off for people who are uh, honest and law abiding, and people who are really seriously invested in trying to make something of their communities. But it's right on target for the empire and for imperialism. And I'm often accused of being a prophet of doom because I say that the empire is about to collapse. But I think that I am with respect to the empire because it's following a very familiar pattern historically. Empires are established for the purpose of trying to take over the world. They start to reach out to other countries and to establish a presence there so that they can exploit and so that they can make profits off of what other countries have, what other regions of the world have. And that has historically included people as well. And what happens with empires is that as they begin to expand, they find the demands on their own resources become so great that they begin to stretch themselves too thin. It's only natural for people who are being occupied, people who are being colonized, people who are being oppressed, people who are being exploited to resist. And in order to maintain its grip on the world, an empire has to do all of those things to people. And in order to keep those people down, to keep them in line, to keep them in control, they very often resort to the use of military forces. They resort to use of international police machinery in order to try and contain people and control them and keep them suppressed and oppressed. And as they begin to pour more and more resources into these overseas military actions, into these overseas military operations, they do less and less to maintain home base. They do less and less to provide for the needs of the people who occupy the territory that they call home. And once that begins to happen, then the people at home begin to become restless. They begin to agitate, and more often than not, everything collapses. Either the people bring it down or it collapses of its own weight. And that's exactly what's happening in this country right now. The U.S. Has established its own form of empire, and it is facing situations that previous empires have not necessarily had to face. In the past, prior empires have had the opportunity, the capacity to be sure that when they needed to engage in these military operations, that they could have the support of the people at home, if not because they had won their hearts, but because they bludgeoned them into compliance. And they could be sure that they were going to have personnel to go and wage these wars for the same reason. In the US, you've got a couple of things. You've got a history now in the US where people have been able to see the contradictions of imperialist war, most notably in Vietnam. And they have become very skeptical, very wary of these military operations overseas. And they place very high demands on government before the US is allowed to deploy its troops anywhere. And knowing that, the US is very reluctant to engage overtly in operations that are going to engage or to use the youth of this country. They can't maintain a draft anymore because they know that there would be such resistance to it. And they know that even now with a volunteer military, they're not able to count on them to be able to staff a full military force that's needed in order to carry out these operations. And so the US has had to resort to several things. One, they've had to resort to use of proxy forces, where in other countries they force or coerce, bribe, or do what they have to do in order to have people in these other countries carry out operations on behalf of the United States. And that's most notably done in Africa through the use of U.S. Africa Command, where the U.S. military lurks in the shadows and directs military operations carried out by African armies on behalf of the U.S. empire. It happens in Central America, or has happened there historically, most notably in Nicaragua, where where they funded and directed through the CIA counter-revolutionary forces that were known locally as Contras. And it happens all the time in a number of different places. The other thing that they have begun to do is they've begun to use technology, so that now a lot of the military operations are carried out by drones and by other types of machinery that don't actually put U.S. troops in harm's way. But all of that has a limited capacity to really do the job for imperialism. It continues to fail. And the U.S. is running out of options. And we can only stand by and watch what the ultimate outcome is going to be.
You know, we've got Dr. Julian Malveaux coming to us, you know, because at the end of the day, as we look at all of these monies, I only have about 4 minutes left here in this segment, but I want everyone to those of you who are watching us online, click the other link so you can catch the second hour of this conversation. Click the other link so that you can catch the second hour of this conversation. Of course, it will continue on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. But in these last 4 minutes, Dr. Malveaux, when Attorney Fancher and Reverend Dr. Todd Urey, when we look at all of this money that's being spent, no strings attached. I mean, we argue about giving old folks money. You know, we argue about giving babies money, pregnant women money, on and on and on and on. But we just write these checks. Where could this money go? How would America benefit if we spend even a portion of this money on Americans?
Well, if you look at what the Senate has allocated, which isn't likely to go through, but it's $96.3 billion. That represents 10 times the Department of Education budget. So you could imagine going from city to city and school to school to talk about needs. We still have schools that have lead paint. We still have schools that don't have lunches. I mean, the young people are being embarrassed because their parents can't pay for their lunches. What if we said everyone can have lunch at school, as opposed to stigmatizing this child or that child or the other child? Not to mention infrastructure, which we keep talking about. And infrastructure generates employment and economy. So all you have to do here in DC is get on Highway 95 and ride down it to have the bumps and the dumps and the, I don't drive, so I can't tell you, but something under your car can break, and it breaks when you go over a bump or a dump. And so what if we had smooth roads? How would that facilitate, quite frankly, commerce? We could go down, education I focus on, laser focus, Santita, because, of my role, both as president of Push Excel and as former president of Bennett College for Women. We could fully fund our HBCUs. Mm-hmm. We could do a bite at reparations. There are so many things that we could do with this money. I do want to caution us, of course, to say that $96.3 billion is an awful lot of money to give with no strings attached. No strings attached. Just take it. Have what you will with it. And I think that folks who are raising questions are raising the appropriate questions. I think another question, and if you want to call me anti-Semitic, please do, but I'm not, is the constant...
No, let's start here. You're not. And I wouldn't tolerate... No. Let me say this on my radio show. That's something that I would not tolerate. But we cannot conflate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, now that is a conversation that we are finally beginning to have. But in this last minute and a half, you want to say what?
I want to say that we have given Israel money with no strings attached to attack other people We've never asked them to be responsible. And now we're seeing President Biden saying this is over the top. I mean, what has it taken for him to say that? But the Israel budget is an
It's
absurd
taken
budget.
us, right? The American people have been pushing.
Finally, our young people have been the ones to raise the questions, because there's so many older people who remember the Holocaust, even though they weren't there, remember the attacks on Jewish people, which were wrong, but that doesn't mean that you get a blank check from the budget of the United States. And that's what's happened heretofore. And so this is time not only to question this, but also question our world involvement and what role we want to take. Now, we can have almost any role we want, but do we want to be the world's police while our children are starving? While our children are starving. It's the question.
It seems like either we're going to be the world's police and children are starving at the same time. It takes us back to what Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said more than half a century ago, right? He said, you can't do both now. You have the war on poverty and the war and a war on another nation. It's going to be either or. It's not, you can't do both.
Even Lyndon Johnson, when he talked about the war in Vietnam, he said he loved his work to eliminate poverty, but Vietnam was a jealous mistress. Those were his words, a jealous mistress. And what he meant by that was he couldn't fund both. He had to make it
there. Stay right there. We're going to come in for the second hour of this conversation because we shouldn't be the jealous mistress. I'm the main girl. I need my money. I need my money. I'm not going to support no mistress. God bless her. I need my money. I need these schools funded. I need health care. We need all that. Back with more of the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio. Back in just a moment.